Hello and welcome to our kitchen table. I am sitting here with my wife, your therapist, and today we're going to be talking about autism.
Yay!
Yay!
One of my favorite topics.
We talked about autism early on in the lifespan of this podcast, one of the earlier episodes, and I had a lot of questions, especially at the time. I was very actively learning about this topic and I had a lot of kind of ground level questions about what autism is, how it works. I want to cover those things, some of those ground level things very quickly, and then I really want to talk about what your journey was like discovering that you're autistic, what that means, and how you came to that conclusion. And then I want to talk about how you are relating to people, autistic people in this space, how you're helping your autistic clients, and what makes you so relatable to folks who are looking for support, especially from a mental health perspective in this space. So my name is Price, and I married your therapist.
Hi, I'm Ash, and I'm your therapist. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, it's not the same thing as or a replacement for therapy.
Because of the way that the order in which we record these episodes, the last episode that we recorded, we asked for folks to send us emails to the imarriedyourtherapist@gmail.com account, and in exchange we would be sending them a personalized video of our fattest cat, Trouble,
Yes.
as a thank you for sending us the email. So far it's been very effective. This is day 2 and we've gotten several emails from fans of the show. Thank you so much. It's so appreciated to hear from you.
Yeah, it really meant a lot.
And every one of you will be getting a delightful, tasteful video from Trouble. We've talked to him about it at length.
He's been very hard at work.
Studying your every word, stalking you on social media. And we will be recording it on VHS and mailing it to your addresses because we found them online. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Obviously, we knew the entire time.
You're on one today.
I'm sorry. I'll focus up. We did hear some specific feedback that I wanted to share with everybody that was super meaningful to you and me. We've already read this. But we had somebody reach out saying that they are switching from weekly therapy to bi-weekly therapy. And in the meantime, they've been looking for therapy or psychology-related content to kind of hold them over because of this change. They said, related to our podcast, I had never heard of autism and ADHD talked about in such a positive and affirming way before, and it really moved me. And I really value hearing that. I want this podcast to be a place that's like very affirming of neurodivergent people, which makes sense because it's hosted by 2 neurodivergent people. I have ADHD, or I am ADHD. You are autistic.
Yep.
And it means a lot to me that people are coming here and feeling like, oh, this is a place where I'm valued for the way that my brain is different.
Yeah, I was reading that email out loud to you as I was the first time that I was reading it through. And I paused right there and almost teared up. It really meant a lot to me. And I get to be so inundated in this space, and I can sometimes, I don't forget because I hear about it all the time from clients, but the world can be really hard, and I forget that sometimes this might be somebody's first encounter with hearing that, if you're neurodivergent, your brain works beautifully, and this is a really inviting, welcoming space. And I love getting to create that, but it meant a lot to us to get to hear.
I think what's important to remember is our kind of underlying philosophy here is that the human race has advanced so quickly, especially over the last several hundred years, that we are so far removed from what our brains biologically have adapted to.
We've continued developing at a regular pace of development, which takes a long time. But technology and the way that the world works has advanced so quickly, so much more quickly.
My grandfather remembered seeing a TV for the first time.
Right. Yeah.
As a child.
And
that was a new thing.
Carry them around in our pockets every day, and they do so much more than that.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's only in this modern world where we view somebody whose brain is different as being broken. That's a very modern concept.
Yep.
That in a village of 100 people, which has been the vast majority of the human experience, is like in those circumstances, having a few people in the mix who are autistic and a few people in the mix who are ADHD makes for a stronger community.
Yeah.
And that's been proven pretty much outright by a number of scientists and anthropologists who were able to just determine that a number of factors in that regard. And so, yeah, it's a very modern idea that that something's wrong with you. Nothing's wrong with you.
Yeah, that these, like the specific sensitivities you have, that the unique way that your brain works, that these are all really good and beneficial things, and that they're things that you can learn to befriend in your own life and learn how to advocate for yourself in an environment that doesn't want to support that, and also to create an environment in the spaces you can.
Yeah.
That's very affirming to your brain.
So if you're neurodivergent or think that you might be, pull up a chair to our kitchen table. You're with friends.
You're our people.
So let's just lay out a few things. Ground floor for autism. Tell me, what is autism biologically? What's going on in somebody's brain that makes them autistic or means that they're autistic?
So what typically happens in brains, in neurotypical brains, so not an autistic or ADHD brain, is that your brain has all of these connected neurons. And when you're born, you have way more of them than you need. And as time goes on, those, especially in those early developmental years, those neurons are pruned. So your brain is very good at getting rid of things it doesn't need, and it's getting rid of those extra connections and keeping and strengthening the ones that you do need that are valuable to you. Well, an autistic brain does not do that. There is some pruning, but there is not nearly the same amount of pruning that happens. So we have way more connections throughout our brains, which is what can give us a lot of the like sensory overstimulation because we're receiving so much input all of the time. I also learned recently that not only is our brain not pruning very much, it's continuing to grow, and I'll have to figure out if this is within a certain span of time or throughout our life, but it's continuing to grow more connections.
Right.
So those connections are increasing over time, and it can just make the world a very overstimulating place in which to find our little baby brains.
I think that a lot of people think of like Forrest Gump or, TV or movie sort of depictions of autism, and they think about the social implications of autism, the way that you talk, the way that you interact with other people, that's what autism is. No, that's a way that autism may manifest itself, but autism is that your brain is like hyper connected.
Yeah.
And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yeah. I was reading something recently that said we were totally wrong to ever describe autism as a list of traits because it's this internal thing that's happening. Yeah. And that externalizes itself in some predictable ways, but basically like autistic people are all different because we're having a different reaction to having so many connections. And some of our connections are different from others. It's not that the same exact places are being pruned. It's that looks slightly different for each of us. So yeah, our experiences are very different. The traits show up to be pretty different.
I think about like a house with the porch light on next to a house with Christmas lights. That's kind of the difference. I don't know why. That's how my brain envisions that.
Between like two different autistic people?
No, between like a neurotypical brain.
Yeah. Well, a string of lights in my brain.
Yeah. Like well lit, does the job, nobody's complaining, and then like, woo! That might not be super helpful. I'm just...
It can feel like that.
Just kind of look into the way I see it, Mm-hmm. So that's what autism is. And another thing I want to lay the ground floor on, you touched on, like, autism was defined as a list of traits. And those traits were defined by a certain group of people.
Yes.
Talk to us just really quick about that, because I think that's an important reference point for people who are being introduced to this.
Yeah. Yeah, that basically it was being studied in white, wealthy, young males who were acting out and had a certain set of behavioral issues that were very annoying to their wealthy parents who wanted kids who fit in and behaved normally.
Quote unquote, normally.
And having a disruptive kid was the biggest issue. So the people who were defining these things and studying this like common list of traits were studying these things that were disruptive and that felt different from other people. So there wasn't anything about the internal world of what these kids were experiencing. It was all about, how is this disrupting my own life?
With the important part being, how does this person's autism impact a neurotypical family?
Right. Yeah. Your existence is bothering me. Here's a list of ways it bothers me. This is autism.
Which is a disservice to the folks that they were studying and basing these diagnoses on. Mm-hmm. It's also a disservice to everyone else.
Right.
And women, kids of color,
mm-hmm.
or just folks of color,
mm-hmm.
really any other like demographic other than that specific like slice of humanity.
Yeah, that it presents so many different ways, and so many people aren't allowed to behave in the ways that these boys are, that it's not safe for them to, or socially acceptable for them to, or they might just have traits show up differently.
Yeah.
Their families might have responded to those traits differently, making them show up in a different way over the period of their life. And so, yeah, it really isolated this one group. So we didn't think that autism existed in girls, and we didn't think that it existed with this certain set of traits. And a lot of Black and brown kids who should have been diagnosed with autism instead were diagnosed with like being oppositional and defiant to authority, and that's the way that it was seen.
Because they just weren't doing what they're told.
Right.
And when Billy, the white kid, doesn't do what he's told, he's like, oh, well, maybe something's different with Billy. Maybe
he's
Billy's
supposed to
special.
grow up to be the authority. Like, what's happening here?
Yeah.
It's not, yeah.
But when the black kid doesn't do what he's told, there's no room for him to be, maybe he's different, but he's just not doing what he's told. He needs to get the fucking line.
Right.
Okay. I just wanted to, that's a whole thing. We could go there. I just wanted to touch on that briefly because you're going to talk about your experience being autistic, and it wasn't immediately apparent to you or to your family that you had autism, or that you were autistic rather, because you're a female and it presents a little differently in a woman.
Yeah.
Or in a girl, especially a young girl, right?
It tends to present differently in girls. And also there are just certain things that are accepted in me, like my shyness, totally fine and applauded and praised. So that continued to be one of my primary traits when little boys aren't supposed to be shy and quiet. What's wrong with you? And that might have been looked at differently. So I had a lot of ways to filter my experience into a way that was socially acceptable that a lot of people don't get the opportunity to.
And I think that if you're listening to this, you're neurodivergent or think you might be, keep that in mind. Keep in mind the social implications that you lived under based on where you're from, who you are,
what your family was like, what their own rules were, and how they expected you to behave. I think that I'm seeing a lot of autistic traits in men who've gone undiagnosed because they didn't have stereotypically male presentations, that they were like the shy, quiet boys, and that in the groups that they were in, that was fine, that they were allowed, or maybe they had a lot of friends that were girls and they were just like accepted in those ways, maybe seen as weird in some arenas of their life. But that they had more of that like female presentation because it's not gendered. Like it just presents in a lot of different ways. Again, it's not a list of traits. It's the way that your brain is. Yeah,
your brain's like overly connected.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't care if you're, doesn't care what gender you were when you were born. Like that's not relevant.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've gotten through most of that. Any other baseline stuff that you would want to cover for anybody listening?
I've also read research that says that our amygdala tends to be bigger, which would just mean that it's like kind of overgrown and more active. And amygdala is the part of the brain that like senses danger. And so it's hard to tell like which part of that comes first, but just knowing that that tends to be another part of the physiological part of being autistic. And so we can also be on high alert, highly stressed out and anxious, not just because of the way that our world is and treats us, but because there's a difference in our brain where we are more likely to be sensing out danger.
It's inherent to who you are.
Yeah.
That's important here. There's the pieces of this that are inherent to the way that your brain, your body composition is. Mm-hmm. And then the implications that has on the way that you behave in the context in which you were raised and the way you were treated because of that, which is another level to this conversation.
Yeah.
So, we need to bring both of those together, because when you tell your story, both of those are going to be at play, like everybody's story for this. Yeah. So tell me about the journey of self-discovery to come to the conclusion that you're autistic.
Yeah. So there was a moment of self-discovery for me where I think I finally accepted for myself that was true.
Like a specific moment in time.
Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of things all along the way. So, I mean, from the time that I was little, there were a lot of traits that, like, my mom over the years has commented on to me that weren't considered weird because they were kind of like silly or cute. My mom accepted them. My family's pretty neurodivergent as it is, so I don't think that there was a lot of like picking up on what was going on. This is just how kids are. But for instance, I did toe walking, which can be common for autistic folks.
Toe walking, like ballet?
I was going to say it's exactly like it sounds, but it's not ballet. Although my mom did call me her little ballerina because of this, but autistic folks are more likely to walk on their toes. Sometimes it's a sensory issue. It's decreasing the sensation of changing from hardwood to carpet and not liking the change. It's just having less pressure on your foot in general. Sometimes it's that like vestibular balancing sort of thing. It can be for a lot of reasons.
Y'all's brains are like some motherfuckers. You know that? I can't imagine like ever caring that I walked from carpet to hardwood. Like that even being a relevant factor in my life that would change the way that I walked, you know? Mm-hmm. But you're saying that that's the world you live in.
Yeah.
That's the world that autistic folks live in, is that they're that sensitive that sort of thing could have an impact on them.
Yeah. And all of these things are going to have the asterisk of being my own experience. Not every single autistic person toe walks. Not every single autistic person cares about the change. There is a joke that most autistic people are either always autistic people, or like sock and shoe autistic people, or barefoot autistic people, because one of those is maybe more preferable. I'm a barefoot autistic person.
You're barefoot all the time.
Yeah, I don't like socks. I'm working on it, honestly. There are some socks that I'm trying to practice wearing, and I can get through a portion of the day with them.
Good for you. I guess. I don't know if it matters if you wear socks.
It doesn't matter. It's just a thing I felt like working on. So, but yeah, I did those things. My mom would say that I didn't play with toys normally. I always arranged things. So I would line up all of the household shoes by like size and shape and color. That's pretty common in autistic folks.
Why would an autistic person want to like categorize things?
So play is just, it's like the work of children. It's the work that kids are doing to regulate themselves, to connect, to experience the world. And what was more regulating for me was to put things in order. I still find that very relaxing. So all of this is happening. I don't remember doing those things specifically. But what is funny is that to this day, I still do enjoy not like taking out everything in the pantry and reorganizing it. That can be kind of an overwhelming task for me sometimes. But like arranging things by size and color. I think recently you were like, we had out some colored pencils or something, and I then needed to take the time to reorganize them in a rainbow color.
We could take the camera into the closet right now and show them how everything in the closet is arranged by size and color, or in your portion of the closet.
In my portion of the closet.
Yeah.
I like that. That's where things are. Yeah, so I did that.
I know that it would like very much bother you if I went and like deliberately messed up the order of. Oh my! For those of you listening, the look on her face was so pitiful. I would never do something like that, but I know that it's like important to you.
Yeah, we tend to like predictability and routine. So
you're struggling going to the grocery store right now because they're remodeling and they've moved everything around.
Yeah, specifically, I think, to ruin my day. What's the worst thing about it, because I'm like, I have a lot of coping skills. I have like my life is so set up to just support me. It's so good. So there are a lot of things that I think that I can get through that at other points in my life might have been really dysregulating. But the thing about the grocery store is that each week it's different. That they are in the middle of a massive renovation. And so it's not just like I had to go in there and relearn it one time. Every single week things are different. And I used to like the routine of going to the grocery store. And right now it really kind of ruins my week.
This is an autism episode, but my ADHD brain, it's different every single week because I don't ever remember where anything is, dude.
It's just so funny how different experiences are. Yeah, no, I go into the grocery store, I go by the same route every time, and I write my grocery list in order of where I'm going to get things, and I'm very much in a routine about it. And
you can set your watch to your grocery shopping.
I organize the cart a certain way, and these are things that make life, they just make life beautiful to get to have that sort of organization. I wouldn't say I'm that way with everything. Like, the house can be untidy.
No, some people could be like, oh man, she sounds anal.
Yeah.
About this stuff, and I wouldn't say that. You know, you don't like put this on anybody, but like when you're grocery shopping, you do put things in the same place in the grocery cart,
because it makes sense. The heavy stuff goes to the back, so it doesn't roll down and crush other things.
Yeah,
and yeah.
No, it does. It does make sense. It is. I objectively understand the logic behind it.
Things that make sense, I like. I like when things are logical and predictable.
That should go on your tombstone. Things that make sense, I like.
Yeah. So I did those things. I was a very rule-oriented sort of kid. I really cared about rules that made sense. I really did not like rules that did not make sense and would have a lot of frustration toward that. I liked a lot of activities that are like very regulating to the nervous system. So things like I loved bouncing on the trampoline. I could do that for hours and hours and hours. I played differently than other kids and sometimes had a hard time playing games with other kids because they like wouldn't follow the rules or they'd want to mix different toys together, and that didn't make sense to my like logical little brain. I was a very literal thinker as a kid. Some people, some of the like old understanding of autism has been that like autistic people can't understand, like literary things, that like we can't understand analogies and what's the other? Oh no, I was really counting on you to help me out.
Allegory, analogy.
It starts with an M.
Monotony.
I feel like your ADHD brain is bored. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
But yeah, that
I was really thinking about trampolines, dude. I've been on trampolines this whole time. I've been thinking the neighbors have one, and I was like, man, maybe we could get back there sometime and jump on their trampoline. I'm so sorry.
I promise we'll have another ADHD episode soon.
You left me in the dust. You kept moving, and then you were asking me a question, and I wasn't with you. I'm sorry.
But yeah, they thought that we couldn't understand things that weren't literal.
Sarcasm. And,
right.
Yeah.
I love those things. In fact, I studied English in school. Like, I love those sorts of things. But they have rules, and they have rules that can be broken in a specific way. And, like, it's knowable. It's understandable.
Right.
And I love, like, poetry. I love things that don't have to have a literal meaning. But I took things literally in that I was very, like, serious about things. And especially when it came to rules, like that was really a way to determine if I was good or bad, or if other people were good or bad. And there can be that very like black and white thinking that goes along with it too.
Why is that true? Because I think most people I think that autistic people are kind of portrayed that way. Mm-hmm. and what I'm trying to say is I think that that's kind of fairly understood. Like, we kind of understand that autistic people like sort of black and white rules. Autistic people love like Dungeons and Dragons a lot of the times because, you know, your character has a character sheet behind it, and then I know how you're going to behave and you know how I'm going to behave, and so there's like structure to this, right? And I love video games because there's structure to this, and I'm painting with broad brush strokes here, but why is that the case? Why do autistic people rely?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times, I mean, for autistic people, social situations just don't feel intuitive. It feels like there are a lot of things that other people just naturally get and catch on to and are able to join in with, and autistic people can really struggle with that. We can really struggle to know when to come in on a conversation, how people are expecting us to answer questions, what's like a regular social norm. And so having a lot of rules helps us to like understand a world that feels very unknowable and unpredictable.
So what's the relationship between this feeling on the outside of social interactions and the overstimulated brain? How does one equal the other? And that might be a tough question to answer. There might not be a solid answer for that, but that, you know, I'm wondering, like, your brain's overstimulated in a lot of, that's true for people with autism. Sorry, autistic people. And we know that autistic people can feel overwhelmed and stressed out in social settings and not know what to do.
Yeah.
Bring that together for me.
I guess I don't know exactly why that is. There's an element to it that is we are taking in a lot more information all of the time. So I think that where a neurotypical brain might be taking in the proper information, the information that their brain has been pruned down to pay attention to these social norms,
Right.
that I'm taking in so much information at once all of the time, it's hard to keep track of what I'm supposed to be keeping track of. And there can be some like crossing of wires and that sort of thing that work in weird ways. So I know that like when it comes to having pain with sound, that there's kind of wires crossed in our hearing sometimes, for some of us, in our hearing and in our and with pain receptors. And so things that are loud can also feel physically painful, and that can happen with all sorts of other senses. And I think that there can be some wires crossed with like how we learn about different turns of phrase. Autistic people are more likely to like exchange a word and something like that. So instead of, it is turn of phrase, right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying turn of phrase, maybe we say something like term of phrase. Like, we're remembering the whole concept. And that's something about autistic people too, is that we often are gestalt processors. So we understand things as whole concepts instead of like the little individual pieces of it. And
what does that mean?
so that has to do, one, with the way that like we learn language, which is that a lot of times autistic folks are delayed in developing language because how neurotypical kids develop language, or allistic kids, which means that they're just not autistic, is that they take a word and then they pair it with another word, and then they end up pairing that with a third word and making a simple sentence, and then they build on that and build on that, and each word is unique and means something all on its own. And for a lot of autistic folks, as they're developing language, they're understanding whole phrases all together to mean something. And so there may be scripting and learning phrases from their favorite shows. This is a phrase that gets used in this situation. And I think that sometimes understanding things as a whole block of something instead of an individual thing can make it really tricky to navigate a social situation too, because social situations are nuanced and are different. And
like, we have a nephew who may be autistic, but like you said, the word delayed, he's been delayed in his language.
Yeah.
And delayed means unintelligent.
Right. We've used it to mean unintelligent,
but that's not the case at all.
No.
It doesn't mean that he's unintelligent. It just means that he's not learning language the same way, which further underscores how different our brains are.
Right.
Like, learning scripting is so different than learning like normally, quote unquote, because you're articulating in whole phrases at a time.
If he's autistic, what will be likely for him is that when he starts speaking in full sentences. That he's basically like waiting until he can communicate whole phrases at a time to be able to say what he means, because it doesn't make sense to him to just say a word when what he means is the whole thing.
That's
that he's
so
not
interesting.
developing language in that way. There's like the top down and bottom up processing, and right now in my head I'm mixing up what the two of those things are. But as autistic people, we tend to like need to know all of the little details of something to put it together and create the whole picture of something, where neurotypical people tend to look at the whole picture of something and be able to understand little things about every bit of it. And so a lot of autistic people, something we've struggled with in putting together the podcast, is that I don't want to talk about something until I feel like I've gotten to examine each little detail of it and learn a lot about it so that I can talk about the whole thing effectively.
And it's not that you don't want to, you will not.
I will not.
You will not talk about something until you feel like you have a good understanding of it top to bottom.
And we're stretching me, because sometimes we do episodes and I don't feel like that, and it makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I always end up like regretting that, because it truly like pains you.
Yeah.
It almost feels like, it seems like a physical thing. And what I've learned over the years of like living with you and working with you is that there's no forcing that. Mm-hmm. There's no pushing it. But my God, once you cross that, once you get to that other side where you feel like you have a good understanding, you've got a good fucking understanding of what you're talking about. And it's like, I've got to just let you get there. And then when you're there, you'll talk about it anywhere, anytime.
Right. Endlessly.
Because you're there, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we tend to want to gather each little detail and examine each little detail individually and put the whole thing together before we feel like we understand something. And neurotypical people tend to look at a whole thing and be able to like, okay, I got a general understanding of that.
Right.
And that's tough with social situations, because social situations are more built on, there's a big thing that happens, and this is repeatable. Inside of that thing, it's fluid and it's nuanced and it's different, but neurotypical people can look at the whole thing and go, okay, this makes sense as a unit. And I'm like, you said this thing, and then I said this thing, and then here's,
Right.
That's hard. It's hard to get comfortable in a social situation like that.
Talk us through some other signs as you look back at your childhood that, means to you or clearly demonstrates to you that you're autistic.
Having a lot of sensory overload and struggling with that a lot of the time. That I was like constantly feeling the clothes on my body and very sensitive to that sort of thing, very sensitive to places with like bright lights. And that what's supposed to happen is that our brain starts to tune out things that don't matter very much in our environment. And my brain, again, all of those connections, doesn't really tune it out. It just continues taking in all of the information all the time.
The way I can wrap my head around this is like, I can feel the clothes on my body when I consciously think about it. Mm-hmm. Listener, think about the clothes that you're wearing. Like, you can feel them, right? Like, of course you can feel them, but when you're not thinking about it, you don't feel them anymore. They're just not present on your brain. And the only way I can wrap my head around this is like that you can always feel it.
Yeah.
There's no turning it off. There's no switching your attention to something else.
Yeah. And what's funny is that even if I'm not consciously thinking about it, even if I am at some level able to tune it out, something that's like uncomfortable or pressure, it's continuing to build. So sometimes I'll get through a day and find that I'm getting really, really frustrated, and I don't know why I'm getting so frustrated and overwhelmed. And then I'll like take off my bra and I'm like, oh, it was that sensation never went away. And all day I stopped consciously thinking about it because I am used to that, but also like the pressure all day long got to me, and now I'm frustrated and overwhelmed.
Can I say something as like a marital partner to you?
I guess.
We've been married for what, 20 years?
Like 35.
30. It feels like 50. In a good way. I think everybody feels better when you take your bra off.
True.
And she
I
owns
mean,
it.
I
True.
don't know. I can't live outside of that experience, but I imagine so. They're not very comfortable.
It's not just that you're like, because I think so many women can relate to like, oh, thank God I can take my bra off after a long day. You like, your attitude can change.
Yeah.
Like you can be in a bad mood, and it's like, oh, that's what it was. It was because I
And
was
it
wearing
was
something restrictive.
literally just that. That's the thing, is that I'll realize that literally nothing else was going on.
Right.
That it was that thing. That it's not like, oh, but also work has been stressful and also this thing has happened and this thing has happened. Because a lot of people will find themselves in a bad mood and not realize why, and then be able to retrace their steps and figure it out. It will literally just be the sensation of the tag. And now that we're talking about it,
Oh no.
I can feel it.
So
So
that's going to be on your mind for the rest of the episode.
focus, I can do it.
Okay.
Okay. Always feeling on the outside of things. Like, I was generally well liked as a kid, that I was on the shy, people pleasing end of all of this, and that's kind of how I coped. So a lot of other autistic folks will struggle with like really being disliked or really being bullied. Thankfully, I missed out on a lot of that, but I always felt on the periphery. I felt like everybody liked me, but I wasn't anybody's like favorite person.
That's nuts. That's nuts.
I continue to be surprised that I think that you like me.
You do check in pretty often. You're like, do you like me? Like, yes. Yes.
That doesn't sound right.
I love you. I'll raise you. I love you.
No way.
I'll raise you one.
Ridiculous. But yeah, that feeling of like always being on the periphery, of like almost not being a human, like feeling outside of human responses. Like humans interact this one way and they tend to relate to each other this way. And I feel like maybe I'm a robot. I'm an outsider to those things.
Man, that must feel so lonely.
It can feel really lonely. The other thing, though, as an autistic person, is that I don't need a lot of social interaction. That, like, social connection and community is very important, but that I get my needs met on that with a pretty limited amount of social contact. Except for my ADHD safe person, my emotional support ADHDer.
That's me.
That's you.
Yeah. So you feel like you're on the outside of things. You didn't feel frequently, you know? Were you, though, or was that just your perception?
I really think that I was on the outside of some things. I think that there can be that doubt around people liking me. I like had a best friend growing up, but especially as like teenage years hit and girls started doing all those social things that girls do and started becoming like fashionable, and I didn't do those things well.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that intuitively, and I didn't like it. It didn't make sense why there was so much like, it felt like pretending.
Right.
Maybe I was the one pretending and masking, but like it wasn't a good fit.
Well, I think that's what attracted me to you, because we were 16 when we met, and that's what I liked about
babies.
you. That's what I liked about you so much, is that you were a little weird, and you just kind of did your own thing.
Yeah.
And I found that very, I saw it as very confident that you were you. And
Really?
yeah.
No way.
Yeah, I thought that you were like a very self-assured person, because you didn't seem to be playing the game that everybody else was playing.
Yeah.
And you didn't seem strange or abnormal. You just seemed like you did things the way that you wanted to do them. And I found that very appealing, because everything else seems so fake.
Yeah. There is something that's like an element that's like a deep lack of confidence, because it feels like social things just make sense for other people, but they didn't make sense for me. But on the other hand, there was this self-assuredness in that, like, I often felt like I was the only company I needed. It was like, I'll be okay. I love being in my own head. It's a very interesting place to be, and I'm great company to myself. And there is something like really freeing and confidence boosting about that. But
Yeah.
I am surprised that you received me as confident.
Yeah. I definitely remember like finding that very appealing. And that's been more and more true as we've grown elderly together.
Aww.
Oh, we're so old.
So old.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You know, remember when we were 16, 14 years ago? Remember? Jesus Christ. Remember?
I barely. I remember.
Talk to me about the moment.
Okay. So it's funny because all of those things had happened, and there was a good span of time. In fact, I have a lot of screenshots on my phone because I'm also a collector of things, which can be a very autistic, where I save everything I ever want to remember and moments and all of that and keep it all in one collection spot, which is my phone. And what I was going to say is that I have screenshots from these several years where I was screenshotting things about autism. I was starting to learn a lot about it
Right.
as a very separate thing that had nothing to do with me. But I had been researching a lot of why I was the way that I was without autism as this thing, but with like
You didn't
why
have
is
the word
social stuff.
autism,
Yeah.
but you were looking into these
I
things.
was looking into these different things. Why is this? Why is my brain like this? Why am I broken? And I was also learning about autism at the same time. And there was a period of a couple of years where we would joke a lot, and you would jokingly call me autistic. And it was a little bit funny, but also I felt very like, that's not something you're allowed to joke about. Like, that's not fair, because some people really are autistic and they really do struggle, and I'm just broken. And so you can't put me in that group. That's not fair to them. And
Jeez.
you were like, but maybe.
Yeah.
So it was starting to become a thing that we were talking about. But the moment was, I was watching a video of a mom who shares about her autistic daughter. And it was a video of her daughter playing, and I just started crying because it could have been a video of me as a kid. It was just so spot on how I was, and I saw something that was, I don't know what it was, like this weird like breakthrough sort of moment. And after all of this time of researching, at that point I think I had taken so many assessments and done so many things that were like, probably. And also, if you keep researching it, it's like if you keep looking up, am I gay? You probably really do like girls. Like, probably, Ashlyn, that's what's happening. And so I kept looking it up, kept doing the assessments, but I just had this moment where I saw this video and I saw this little girl and I was like, oh, that's me. And it made me tear up. It was such a like relief, I think, to finally like allow myself to put all of those pieces together.
What about it was so relieving to you?
Because all those things didn't make sense. I had so many like question marks in my life, and so many things that I pushed off as other things, or that's trauma, that's this thing, that's just me being bad at that, that's me being overly sensitive. And it was like, oh, there could be a common connecting feature to all of this.
This is one of the biggest things for me, is that understanding, having a name for these things about your brain that haven't up to this point made no sense.
Yeah.
has gotta be so helpful and
It's
relaxing.
like, oh, this exists. I exist. I'm not just worse than everybody. I have a brain that functions exactly the way that it should when you have way more connections than most people you're interacting with, you know?
Oh, I'm not broken. I'm just different. This is normal.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of relief in that. I mean, we had been tossing around for so long, and I was so hesitant to like think of myself that way. And then whatever it was in that moment, I saw the video and I was like, oh, it's me. Like, and to see yourself, it's so important as humans to like see ourselves too. And I think that as an autistic person, you don't see yourself very often. You see people who you're supposed to be like, and no matter how hard you try, you can't be like that.
Which is one of to go back to what we were talking about kind of originally, that this research originated with white, wealthy boys, was so limiting to everybody else who might be born with autism, because it doesn't care what you look like on the outside.
Right.
But we define those traits as specific to this socioeconomic and racial group. And it really prevented a lot of people from being able to see themselves in the way that you were able to see yourself in that video that day.
It was such a big deal for me. I very weirdly took a picture of myself in that moment because it was like, oh, I'm me. I might be a human too.
I don't remember that exact moment that you came. I know that you came and told me,
Oh, yeah.
but I just remember like, okay, like, yeah, all right. Like, does this mean, are you going to be different now? No? Oh, okay.
Same. It's
Same
just-
thing.
Two things that I forgot to mention earlier that I think we had talked about previously, but I forgot. One is that a common trait was that I was scripting out conversations ahead of time. I was really planning them ahead and talking them through, not just like where you win the argument with yourself in the shower because you got it wrong in the moment,
Right.
but like planning out my whole day and the conversations that I was going to have, and also practicing facial expressions. That I would like practice facial expressions that I'd seen other people make in the moment, and I was making those
I
to
would
myself.
love to have seen you practicing facial expressions that you had seen other people made right after like watching a Jack Black movie. That would have been great.
That would have really disrupted some of the like normalcy I was going to live going for.
I don't want to make it sound like that I find this super weird or off-putting. I do find it bizarre in that I cannot personally relate to the need to rehearse a facial expression or rehearse a conversation.
Yeah.
That was upcoming. Like this conversation is coming up. And yeah, I think we all rehearse conversations in the sense that like we might practice, okay, these are the things that I need to say.
Especially if you're going to go have a tough conversation or you're going into like a job interview.
Yeah.
I think it's very normal to rehearse ahead of time. But like daily life, regular conversations, rehearsing those.
Which gets back to that Gestalt language processing a little bit, right? Like
Yeah.
you talk in full concepts and full ideas, so you want to like practice those ahead of time.
Yeah, if somebody switches something up on me, now I have to reset my whole model that I was following.
That's so interesting. So there's something wild that you've been doing lately because you are in a unique position as somebody with autism who is working with people who are autistic. And you are able to determine if somebody is autistic at a glance.
Yeah.
Literally at a
sometimes.
glance. And I've seen it confirmed a number of times where you can say, hey, I think that person's autistic. And then we'll later like organically learn that person is in fact autistic. With shocking like it's shocking to me how good you are at this. How is that possible? How are you like the autism whisperer?
It's a vibe.
It's a vibe. The autism vibe.
I don't know. It is looking, well, okay. So something else that can be an autistic trait is pattern recognition and being very good at identifying a pattern. And I have seen so much about autism and sat with so many autistic people and really like analyzed myself and read some, like I've just had so much input of autism that pattern recognition is just there for me. It's pretty easy for me to spot. I wouldn't say it's 100% of the time. There are definitely, it looks so many different ways. Like there's not just one way that it looks, but I'm constantly like expanding my vocabulary of that, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I think that we can get good at recognizing one another. A lot of autistic folks are first recognized by their autistic friends who are like, hey, I think you do some of the things I do. And so, yeah, when clients will say certain things, I think I talked about some of this in the Zoe episode, but when clients will like feel like they developed an anger issue that came out of nowhere, when clients will say, they never felt like a human, or they have a lot of rules, or they like those are going to be indicators to me that might be the direction that we're going. Now, it's never fair for me to be the person to like, we're going to take time to figure that out together. I'm not just going to,
you're autistic. You're autistic.
Right,
Of
again,
course not.
You're the expert in the room on you. You know yourself better than anybody else. We'll take time to explore. But yeah, it has gotten to the point where I feel like weirdly I have a sense for that.
What's that been like with your clients? Do you feel like you know with your clients if they're autistic or not?
This feels like weird to say. Often, yes. Yeah, I'll often get on with a new client and go, this person's autistic. I'm pretty sure of it. We'll take the time to figure out.
Like out the gate, like immediately.
Yeah, but then I have to go, have they told me that they are? In other words, do they know that they are and we're moving from that point? Do they suspect that they are and we're moving from that point? Or is this going to be a brand new conversation? And if it's a brand new conversation, we're going to take our time. So.
Yeah, you're not going to just drop that off on somebody who may not be like in a place where they want to hear that.
That's not fair to them. And also, I don't know. I don't know like that.
Yeah, that's fair. So I had an experience recently, or we had an experience recently, where we went to see the new Guardians of the Galaxy film, which I think is a remarkable movie in that it made me cry, and it was extraordinarily boring. I think that, minor spoiler warning. I think this is pretty well known about the film, but it's got a lot of very dark animal torture scenes in it that are like whiplash from the tone of the rest of the movie, because the rest of the movie is just like a normal Guardians of the Galaxy film if you're into that. And of course I'm gonna cry when I see a little animal getting hurt. That's just my life now. I'm more emotionally like available, and I'm going to cry.
You're so tenderhearted, and I love that about you.
Exceptionally boring movie. I'm sorry, I'm not giving a movie review. There was a child in the row with us who was probably around 10 years old, and he was autistic. Did we get introduced to this child? Were we told that by his parents? No. But it was just incredibly obvious to me, having learned a lot about autism, that this young man was in fact autistic.
He was doing echolalia, where he was repeating noises that he was hearing. He was getting really overstimulated when things were loud, and he was making noises to try to like counter that.
If there was a big sudden boom, he would yell, and he would try to make the same noise as the boom, as loud or louder than the boom itself in the theater. Yeah. I could hear people snickering behind us who were like annoyed and kind of laughing at this, objectively inappropriate behavior for a theater, right? And we can talk about the merits of the parents who brought the child to the theater, to a crowded theater, when he was reacting that way. But it was not that much of a bother to me, although it would have been a few years ago. I would have been very frustrated, and it would have kind of ruined my movie experience. But it wasn't that much of a bother to me, because I knew what was going on. And it was very eye-opening to me that I just need to be able to have a better understanding of the world around me, and then the frustrations and the anger with these things goes away, right?
Oh yeah, that it was definitely like disruptive. That's not what belongs in a movie theater in general. We expect in a movie theater to be able to go in and things are quiet. Occasionally you're in with a crowd who's like louder and responsive to the movie, and that kind of fits the movie.
Sure.
But in general, like, you're expecting people to be respectful of the audience and of, that whole experience. And this is something that I think just stereotypically like disruptive. But it was easy to deal with when we knew exactly what was happening. I knew what to expect. We knew that when there was a loud noise, he was going to make it back. We knew that he was like repeating words and things that he was hearing. And we knew what that meant for his processing and how that was helping him to enjoy the experience. And just that knowledge and awareness alone, it was like, this really isn't bothersome at all. This isn't what I'm expecting in a movie theater. And again, like, that's a separate conversation. But yeah, as people who knew what was happening, I think we were getting to have a very different experience than some of our fellow moviegoers who seemed very put off by the whole thing.
And I get it. Like, I'm not saying, well, they should do better, and I'm not really in defense of the kid who was being disruptive, but I'm just speaking from my personal experience. Like, it just didn't bother me that much. And I think that it goes to show, like, when we understand how people's brains might work, we become more accepting of behaviors that would be viewed as disruptive or abnormal. Yeah. Because we're like, oh, that's not abnormal for him with that brain. Yep. And as somebody with a different type of brain and who's working, I want workspaces and work colleagues who give me the opportunities to, like, get to work the way that I want to work. And I want to see that for people with autism as well. I want to I want to see a world where autism is better understood.
Yeah.
And through understanding, better accepted.
Yeah, that there's so much to be said just for understanding what's happening and why it's happening. And I think that that's a space we get to be in where not only are we teaching people about their own brains, but we're teaching people who aren't autistic, who don't have ADHD, what this looks like and why it can happen and why it makes sense that your coworker's doing these things or that your kiddo's doing these things. And I think it makes the world just an easier place to exist in when we can accept those differences in other people. But
and accept those differences in ourselves.
Yeah, that's true. That was exactly that like breakthrough moment for me, was that like these differences aren't bad. They like add up to equal something that's just the way that my brain is. It's just the way that I exist. It's not bad.
With just a few minutes left in this episode, I really want to talk about briefly the process of getting an official diagnosis for autism, which is not something that you have pursued. Right. But we just spent a long time talking about all the steps you took to come to the conclusion that you're autistic.
Yeah.
Why? Our dog's yawning.
She's done.
Why are you not pursuing getting an official diagnosis?
Yeah. So the process for getting a diagnosis, you're probably going to have a recommendation from somebody, and then you're going to...
Like a referral.
Right. Yeah. And then you're going to go get an assessment by somebody who's not like your personal therapist, but somebody who is just assessing you. And it's going to be hours and hours and hours of assessment. I think like 4 to 8 hours, somewhere within there.
Okay.
And it can be thousands of dollars. And there's often a long wait to be able to get in to have an assessment like that done.
How long?
Years sometimes that people will wait, 1 to 2 years to go get an assessment. And often it's a very unaffirming process. Because again, a lot of the people who are giving these assessments, the majority of the field has been trained in this very unaffirming way, that it looks this one way, like we researched way in the past.
Yeah.
And you made eye contact with me during your assessment, you're not autistic. Well, every day as a child, my mother yelled at me for not making eye contact. Of course I made eye contact with you. That's something I've forced myself to be able to do. Or, well, you're a woman, so you're not autistic. Or you've held down a job, so you're not autistic. These are real things that people have heard in the room after waiting all this time and paying all this money to go in and have those questions asked. So it can be a very unaffirming process. There are some reasons that people unfortunately need to go through it.
Yeah, we've had people in our comments talking about needing an official diagnosis so that they can get food stamps.
Yeah, that they're dealing with such severe traits, whether it's like social stuff or overstimulation or whatever, that they can't be in a work environment and they can't make ends meet. They need support. They might need accommodations at their job that they do have. Something needs to give. They need an official diagnosis to be able to access accommodations that I think should just be available to humans. But yeah, so it's very unaffirming. There are some reasons that people need that. Thankfully, I don't need accommodations in my life because our life has very much been able to just accommodate me, that I work from home. And so I don't have to navigate a job or an outside job. And our life is very autism friendly. We've changed a lot of things in our life since learning. I was dealing with a lot of burnout before we knew.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it doesn't help me at all to go get an assessment. It's like if I had been born with 3 legs and somebody's like, you want to go get that checked out? Would you like a doctor to look at you and tell you if you really have 3 legs or not? And it's like, you can count them. Like, it exists. I know what's going on. And there are a lot of other autistic people in the same boat where, like, They've done the research. They've noticed all the signs and traits like we've talked about during the episode. They know that these things are true for them. And while in a lot of things, like we figure an official diagnosis is standard, it's very valid in the autistic community to go like, I don't need to go through this process to know something that I know. We joke about autistic folks being peer reviewed too, that like your autistic friends recognize your traits as well.
Right,
but like
right.
you can, if you need the accommodations, you need them. But you're valid. They're like, you know this about you. And yeah, so when it comes to me, I think that there's a lot of pressure from the outside world to get an assessment, get a doctor's stamp of approval on whether or not you are. And it's like, I know that I exist. And it's very freeing. And I think that it's been a big part of this advocacy within the community to go like, we know.
What do you say to the people who are in our comments addressing us directly? You know, we've seen this saying you have to get a diagnosis. Like, you don't know until you get a diagnosis. What's your message to them? I got you. Fuck off.
Yeah, that's basically the way that I feel. It's so immediately obvious that there's either a lack of education or a lack of recent education about what's going on. And it's like, that could have been me a couple years ago. I didn't tend to tell people about shit I didn't know about when I didn't know about it. But, you know, it could have been me. I didn't know anything about autism. It's why I looked at every other option before I got here, because I had this old standard view of what that was.
Of what autism is.
Yeah. But of course you think that if you've been taught this one standard old view and you're uncomfortable with things that are unfamiliar to you.
Yeah.
But that doesn't serve anybody. And it's the same thing. Like, people are the expert in their own life.
Yeah.
Nobody needs you showing up, knowing nothing, and watching a 48-second clip and going, I know you're not autistic. Okay, great. Let's switch brains for a day.
Try me, motherfucker.
Try it out. How are those clothes feeling now?
We even got a comment like, she doesn't look autistic, and I was like, man, you don't know her at all. Like, she's autistic, homie. I don't know what you're talking about.
I forget, but I think I'm swaying back and forth now. I think something was happening in that literal moment when we got the comment, and it was like, look at you.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Yeah.
So yeah, people can believe the things that make their world a small and safe and knowable place, but like the autistic community, like, we know what's going on. And if you're uncertain, not only do you have the option of going through this process of trying to get an assessment, but if you're questioning this for yourself, it's also a valid route to like just go talk to somebody who's affirming, who understands autism, who understands what we know about it now, and who can talk you through that process.
If we want to reach out to somebody who's affirming,
do we know anybody?
I think we can think of a few people, right?
Okay, cool.
Where's a good place that we might get connected with some resources?
I Married Your Therapist on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. You can email the podcast, imarriedyourtherapist@gmail.com. I believe we have a cat in the way of the camera. Thanks. Hi, YouTube. And you can find me specifically at therapywith_Ash on Instagram.
And I want to shout out something different than we normally would. Your private practice website
Oh, yeah.
has a page for people who are looking for autism resources.
Yes.
That might be very helpful for somebody who's looking for like self-assessment or more information, you know, where they can kind of pursue this education for themselves.
AshtreeCounselingCenter.com has resources that will direct you to other assessments. We have a blog post about autism, a couple different ones, and some great resources on there.
Yeah, if you're really in this and think, like, if you email us and ask us for resources, that's where I'm going to point you. So you can, you can go straight to it if you're
go straight to the source. AshtreeCounselingCenter.com.
Well, thank you so much, Ashlyn, for your time.
Thank you for your time, Price.
And we'll see you next time on I Married Your Therapist.